Oh,
Good evening and welcome to the Anarchist News Review from Freedom Press, freedompress.org.uk, freedomnews.org.uk with you every week in 2025 for as long as the year lasts. With me, I'm Uri Gordon, Freedom Editor, and with me is Simon from Freedom Press, Sam from Freedom Press, Sonia, Freedom News Deputy Editor, and we've got, well, at least three topics that we'll try to touch on today. The main things that are in the news. First of all, yeah, the Trump inauguration. I guess the big question of the day is Elon Musk a Nazi, or is he also channeling Dr. Strangelove? We'll try and debate that as we go along. The Gaza fragile ceasefire that we hope will last, but is certainly um, a matter for debate between Donald Trump and his cabinet, most likely, and some of the current sort of UK race-based moral panics that have been going on in the last 2 days, with Labour seeming all too keen to play to Tory fear-mongering. Well, let's start with the Trump inauguration. It feels like 2025 has been on suspension until yesterday. And then we had in Washington a full display of the gallery of oligarchs: Trump, Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, all there to inaugurate this new combination of fascist rhetoric and kleptocratic practice. And then with Elon Musk sort of again spilling the beans, saying the quiet part out loud, call it what you want. Who wants to go first? What did you make of that? Is it really first time farce, second time tragedy, or are we tragedy and farce all mixed up together?
well, on the subject of the salute, let's sort of start with that one there. I think the response to it is probably the most kind of important part. There's a lot of kind of playing down what it sort of signifies, or the discussion around what it supposedly signifies. Kind of, which I feel, I personally feel kind of misses the point a bit. The fact of the matter is it's a fascist salute. It's, like, regardless of whether he's doing it because he's an ideological Nazi, which I'm not necessarily inclined to say he is, or whether he's doing it as a joke, it like the same, it's the same thing. He's still doing a Nazi salute, and that definitely signifies something, and that needs to be scrutinized. I personally don't think he is a Nazi, but like he is. I think that it's fairly safe to say that Musk is a Nazi sympathizer at the very least. He has done a lot to boost Nazi content, including Holocaust deniers and Holocaust denial related things. He's done that at least on three separate occasions, and each time it's caused a fuss. And so, you can say what you like about that. You do it the first time, yeah, okay, maybe it's an accident. You do it a second time, maybe you should be more careful. You do it a third time, once again, like, serious questions need to be asked about like why he keeps doing this.
Well, a Nazi salute is really, doesn't leave a lot of room for the imagination. I mean, Crime Thing said today, Musk took over Twitter in order to enable Nazis, and the fact that it's being played down, including by the Anti-Defamation League, which used to be an organization active mostly against anti-Semitism, and now is an organization that is, identified with alleging anti-Semitism at every criticism of Israel. That when they see the real thing and they choose to play it down, I think is absolutely shameful. Um, and I mean, it's a degree to where 8 years ago, it was only the Richard Spencers of the world who would, not even with a Nazi salute. I mean, he had this event, if you remember, in the U.S., and he said things like, "Hail Trump,
Mm.
hail our victory," which is, yeah, translates into Sieg Heil in German. And that was someone who was like, and pretty much acknowledged, you know Nazi sympathizer who was then, bankrupt and kicked out of his gym. This is the richest man in the world. This is no laughing matter. I mean, even that this is supposed to be a joke, to me it's not funny at all.
No, I mean his long time background has been fairly broadly known to be kind of based in a sub 4chan or post 4chan kind of um, wind up the normies to make hay with your gamer bro buddies kind of aspect, and it's incredibly cringe to any, particularly anyone of our generation, who looks on it and is like, yeah, I remember being like this a bit in my late teens, early 20s, and then I got over it and I went off and did something else. And that was a brief period of super edgelordy, right? Um, and I think there's an element that he absolutely is doing this as a man in his 40s who clearly has, you would think would have better things to do with his life, but clearly doesn't. Um, but also there's an element where, so if you're an anarchist, you build to a degree, you build your sense of self-worth on doing things that uh, fit into a kind of ethical moral framework that people who you respect will believe in and agree with, right? Like there's an element of that in any community based or any interaction with the community, social interaction. And I think that Musk, particularly because he's clearly a forever online kind of guy, has built this kind of self-image of himself, which prioritizes impressing a certain subset of society, which laughs at, hey, you've managed to annoy the liberals, you've managed to, put something wildly out there up on mainstream media, and no one's telling you off for it. And it's this kind of, how much can you get away with stuff? And it's kind of part of what he is, but the other part is that he is genuinely a committed white supremacist. He's got family background for it. He's got an obvious trend in the way in what he writes and how and what he prioritizes writing about, which goes back for years now. He abandoned liberalism in theory, his liberal streak, like most of a decade ago now, and he's been doing various far right related stuff ever since. Um, so I think that the important thing to understand, seemingly, but certainly about Musk, you can only ever look from the outside in, is that he is both troll and committed far right radical. They're not separate things. They're not things which you can say in a bespoke way. Him doing a Nazi salute is one or the other. It's both at all times. Um, and one of the things which has made this project so dangerous is that it plays on known far right strategies. The far right strategies of like white, the old OK sign, and the way that they took it over as white power. Um, this whole thing of deniable, is it trolling? Is it actually fascism? Um, that's a strategy that they've been using for years, and it's one that he has adopted very effectively, actually. And all these people kind of saying, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's autistic, which is particularly egregious as though being autistic means you don't understand what a Nazi salute looks like. Um, or, he's just awkward or whatever. It's all excuses for people who don't want to look at this kind of stuff and say, it is what it is, right?
That's right. I mean, I think, beyond these kind of plausibly deniable things, we are probably going to be facing a lot of very real world suffering caused by the Trump administration. We're talking both about policies and repression at the US Mexico border, much more sort of a permissive repression of women, of trans people, of LGBT people, and so on. I wanted to ask maybe Sonia to contribute. What was your reaction to the Trump inauguration? It's, something that we've been sort of waiting for and are still waiting to see the consequences of. Um, Maybe you can speak to, what you look forward to and what struggles we might, be able to encourage and support in the immediate future.
And that's the thing. I think that people are giving up absolutely too much focus into what these people are doing. They are openly white supremacists, and you can put them in different boxes, right? Fascist, and we can analyze them from absolute all angles. But the truth is that I saw parts of it yesterday, and it's as expected. I mean, USA has their modern history. It's from a white settler colonialism perspective. I mean, what do you expect? That's exactly what we are having now. They have had it all the time. The difference is that now it's visible, it's open, there's no limits, and they have absolutely the ties they have with all these crypto fascists and all the techno bros, like they call them, some of them. They have now we are going to see these oligarchs and all the power they have. I agree with what all of you have said, and I would like to add just that the precarity and the oppression that a lot of groups have had. You mentioned trans people, but also Black and Indigenous people since, at least, I mean, all the time they have been resisting. But I know that since 2016, the first time he was there, people are organizing, and people already the first time he was in charge, people were already talking that it can start a civil war there. The problem is, like Uri was pointing at, is that it's not going to be a civil war. I mean, they're the biggest military power right now, and it's going to have consequences also for disabled people, for several inmates. And now, for instance, the fact that they are retracting already from international pacts that we as anarchists might not care much about, but actually it can, until a certain degree, have ensured some life quality for some groups. This is going to it's done. I mean, it's gone, and he's not going to retract that. So I think we are going to, going to a dark path, which is interesting, and we haven't talked about, is that we had several European leaders, so-called leaders, there, and also from other countries. Millet was there. I know that very well. He's of course one of the bunch, but we have our own fascist here, and I think also in Europe we should be very worried about those ties they have. They are going to be collaborating at a much higher degree. And this is something we also should be worried about. And of course, supporting the resistance. The resistance has always existed, but I think we are going off absolutely to see, it's going to get worse. We know that.
And this with the connection, of course, to Musk's very open support for the AfD in Germany, and this is something that is now is certainly solidifying with that Nazi salute. And we should also mention, of course, the festivals of resistance that were organized in the United States around the date of the inauguration. We already had marked in Sacramento, Chicago, and other places who were organized events a day early, and then over 24 cities that hosted festivals of resistance in the United States this past weekend. If you go to our colleagues and comrades stateside crimethink.com, you can catch a report about events including in Brooklyn, Cleveland, Ohio, North Carolina, Indiana, Minnesota, California, Washington, Rhode Island, Virginia, Arizona, and many other places. Well, we will keep, of course, following developments in the US with both interest and interpretation. Maybe this is time also to, let's have a last comment on this topic then.
So one thing I think that it is probably worth noting is that this isn't just a calamity, it is actually an opportunity as well. This is 4 years in which there will be no other method of resistance other than extra-parliamentary. The Democrats do not control any house. The best that they can possibly manage to do is hold off things which might change the Constitution, because he doesn't have enough numbers for that. But other than that, this is an absolutely golden opportunity for anarchists and any extra parliamentarian protest and direct actionists to be saying, look, what other options are there? Get involved in things which are going to fight back or strike back or resist this in ways which are not your standard A to B marches. They're not your standard wait until the vote, because it's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, this might also, of course, get dragged into electoral politics on a state or local level. There's already been talk about, so-called blue states trying to organize state-level healthcare, for example, as a sort of campaigning rallying point. Take it local if we can't do it on the federal. Of course, that's another dead end, as we understand as anarchists. But indeed, on the level of congressional action, there's going to be very little to look forward to. That said, it turns out that when the so-called left takes parliament, not a lot might change either, as we are finding in this very smooth segue in our own country here in the UK, where the last week has seen Labour play along to Tory moral panics, instituting an investigation into grooming gangs, and talking about new legislation to deal with lone wolf attackers, now that they have happened to pass through all of the previous supposed filters that were, again, always more political than securitist. I mean, it's kind of funny how they set up all these things, and at the moment of truth, they don't work. And nevertheless, they're still able to play along to kind of racialized scare stories and moral panics on both fronts. Anyone who's been following the UK news for the past weeks care to comment on that? I mean, this is really Labour sort of continuing to play the Tory game once in power. Anyone who thought they might turn around and go, "Oh, we were just pretending we're actually going to be social democrats now," is certainly supposed to be disappointed.
I mean, the idea.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
oh, sorry.
No, you.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, this is another one of those instances, where the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's kind of very frustrating to find ourselves back here having exactly the same arguments over and over again, especially, this has got a lot of, it's very reminiscent of what was happening, 10 years ago when the EDL was reacting to, this initially, which is, it's almost as if no one learned anything from then. And this is obviously kind of quite frustrating to see, because once again you have a group of people who are sort of taking advantage of a tragedy for their own ends. They don't care about the victims. They've kind of gone out of their way to do stuff that has straight up jeopardized the ability of the victims to get justice. I mean, Tommy Robinson, who sort of the heart of a lot of this, turned up and sort of at kind of courts and sort of risked mistrials for his own political game. And this is exactly what the Tory party are doing now. And this is a very easy thing to point at. The evidence is all there, and yet the Labour Party continues to flail wildly, trying to respond to this. And when what's happening is very easy to see and very easy to explain, it's honestly quite baffling that they're struggling to kind of cope with it.
I mean, I think so one of the things that Boris Johnson became, and indeed many prime ministers have been fairly notorious for, is that whenever there's any kind of major terror incident, they will call a meeting of Cobra to deal with it, so that they can look active and look like they're taking charge of the situation. And I think most of what Keir Starmer's doing is very much in that playbook. Like this whole thing about we're going to bring out legislation to deal with this new phenomenon of lone wolf killers, and it's like, I'm sorry, but there's a whole Wikipedia list of lone wolf killers. There's like lone wolf killers in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Like, they're not. This is not some new phenomenon, and this idea that that a legislative change is suddenly going to stop people from doing lone wolf attacks is nonsense. I mean, anyone who's spent any time reading the news is nonsense. But it's all this kind of symbolic embracing of spectacle, and sort of saying, well, this time we'll fix it. It mostly serves to enable extensions of police power which, as we can see, because it still happens, does not actually stop anything. Like one of the complaints to do with Southport was that this guy had been referred to Prevent multiple times, and Prevent hadn't picked him up. And it's like, well, yeah, of course. Anyone who's a dedicated person wanting to cause havoc is not going to find it that difficult, if they're in any way competent, to put off someone saying, "Hey, are you a terrorist?" It's like this thing where they put it down on the form when you're coming into the country. It's like, have you ever been arrested for terrorism, or are you a terrorist? It's like, what are you expecting terrorists to say under those circumstances? It's what it does do. The production and extension of these powers for the police and for the likes of Prevent is create an atmosphere of a chilling atmosphere against people who happen to have dissenting viewpoints. Like, the idea is to put them off, and clearly it doesn't work if people are dedicated. But what it does do is, it hits people who are not likely to become lone wolf killers. It damages the ability of people to dissent in ways which are legal or
Moral, ethical.
morally based, whilst not actually catching people who don't give a stuff about that kind of thing.
Well, this is probably not the end for us with this. Of course, it feels like immigration and refugees were just inhabiting the news cycle for a bit too long. So there had to be, just something new to pull people's attention to until we can get back onto the cycle. But these are all sort of these racially inflected panics that seem to serve a main purpose of extending police powers, A, and B, just continuously drawing attention away from ongoing poverty, ongoing pollution, and the fact that the UK is busier playing adult in the room in NATO than dealing with actual difficulties that people are facing and for which they actually got elected. Well, I guess we may go back overseas for our last item, and that's to say that I guess we skipped an opportunity to have a bit of a breather at the ceasefire and beginning of prisoner exchanges surrounding Gaza. A very fragile ceasefire that the far right in Israel, including those in government, are intent on scuttling. And 42 days is a very long time. The concern right now, I'm sure, in both Gaza and Israel, among those who care about life rather than continuing this war, is that it all depends on Donald Trump's attention span, and that it is down to his pressure on Netanyahu to keep this thing going. Rather than it collapsing, and then we'll see a continuation of the genocide in Gaza and the death of the rest of the hostages. Israel could have already accepted this deal as it stood on the table, back in October, some say back in May 2024, when it was very clear, and it's very clear to anyone in the Israeli public with eyes in their head. These were scuttled by Benjamin Netanyahu by adding last-minute conditions, putting spins in the media, all in order to continue this war for as long as he could keep it going. And there is no reason to think that the current ceasefire is seen by him and his supporters as anything other than a brief interlude, after which these hostilities can be resumed. Um, and this is a very, very difficult situation in which, on the one hand, people in Israel are suddenly praising Trump for pressuring Netanyahu. On the other hand, it's dependent on such a fickle set of circumstances. Well, I guess there's not even much more to say about that. We can only hope for good news. What we can promise you in the coming week is continued coverage from freedomnews.org.uk of everything that's going in Anarchist News. Any last comments or ideas from our panelists tonight?
Merely a little announcement. We've got a book coming out. In fact, we've got two things going on. We've got a discussion event, which is going to be hosted by our very own Uri that way around, Fight for a New Normal. And that's going to be taking place on the 30th at Freedom, I believe.
Next Thursday in the evening at Freedom Bookshop in Whitechapel, London.
And we are also having a book launch on February the 13th for Physical Resistance. And this is a book which we are bringing out our own edition with writing which brings, so the original edition was brought out in 2009, and this one is being updated to 2018 with the history of basically grassroots direct action anti-fascism in Britain. It's a fantastic book. Louise is a very engaging speaker, and we're very much looking forward to bringing it out. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be going up on the Freedom website fairly soon, I would imagine.
That's great. Looking forward to these publications. Thank you very much to our panelists, Sonia, Sam, and Simon. Thank you to all our viewers who joined us tonight. Please follow us. We're on Telegram. We're on Instagram. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Facebook. We're physically located at Angel Alley in Whitechapel. Coming soon